Most language learning advice tells you to read textbooks or drill vocabulary, but in practice people learn languages far faster through things they already enjoy. So today, I want to talk about German animation. So I'll start with die drei Räuber, or the three robbers, but it's translated as trick or treaters, based on a famous children's book by Tommy Ungere. Ungere actually grew up in Alsace, so his work sits in this interesting space between French and German culture. The film opens up with three bandits roaming the night, robbing travelers using an axe, a pepper blower, and a blunderbuss. Just kind of like a pistol, I guess. One night they attack a carriage carrying a recently orphaned girl named Tiffany, who, instead of going to the orphanage, would rather stay with these three bandits. So she tells them she's the daughter of a rich Maharaja, and with a bit of convincing from Tiffany, they kidnap her for ransom. While all this is happening, the orphanage is run by this horrifying woman who is obsessed with streets. Kind of similar to the witch from Hansel and Gretel, giving off this Brother Grimm vibes to a certain extent. And so she forces the children to collect beets all day because you can extract the sweetness from the beets and create cakes or candy. And she's constantly preaching this motto of ohne Rübe keine Liebe, which basically means no beets, no love. Without beets, there will be no love. And the story is both immensely heartwarming and vaguely grim. The orphanage itself looks terrifying, I would argue, giving off again this Brother Grimm's fairy tale atmosphere. Just for reference, I wanted to show you some of the reviews. I'll show you the German and the English translations because I think they're kind of interesting to read. So the reason I'm putting this animation first is because I really loved it when I was younger. I originally watched it in Russian, of course, because I didn't know German as a kid. Really great dub if you're interested in that too. They even translated the opening songs. By pure coincidence, it was also the film that we watched in my 3-week German intensive course. Our professor dedicated the entire class to watching this animation with no subtitles, and that I greatly appreciated. I don't know, the sentiment of watching animation for learning is something I greatly admire. Though not all of us fully understood everything that was happening, because the language is made for mostly children, they tend to use simpler words to express the vastness of their thoughts, which makes it easier for language learners to kind of understand what is happening. So yeah, highly recommend. So the second one is Knopf und Lukas, der Lokomotivführer. This animation is based off of the famous 1960s children's book by the German writer Michael Ende, and the book became one of the most beloved children's stories in the German-speaking world and was quickly adapted by a famous puppet theater, der Augsburger Puppenkiste, in the early 1960s. It was initially filmed in black and white, but then because it was so popular, they decided to make it in color in the 1970s. So the story begins on a tiny island called Lumaland, where a mysterious package arrives one day containing a baby boy. This child is later named Jim Knopf, or Jim Button, and he grows up alongside the island's locomotive driver, Lukas. Also, Lukas's steam engine, Eva. And so the three of them leave the island on this enormous adventure across oceans, deserts, and other strange lands, eventually trying to rescue a kidnapped princess from the dragon city of Kumaland, or Sorrow Land. So this one is quite personal to me because my dad used to read the Russian adaptation of Jim Knopf, and also my best friend who lived in Germany and speaks fluent German recommended this puppet series as something she used to watch when she was learning the language. I also wanted to add that the story is surprisingly progressive for its time. It was written in the 1960s. The writer was a massive anti-racist and really did not like the ideology during the Nazi period in Germany, so he wrote this book about Jim Knopf. That being said, the original puppet version is from the 60s, so some of the things can feel a bit out of pocket, so I would recommend watching a later German-French adaptation. I watched a few episodes and it's genuinely quite good, so it's very approachable for learners and a bit nicer for modern viewers. So I recommend both. Feel free to watch the black and white, the colored, and also the modern day adaptation. They're all quite good. Number 3, der Mondmann, or the Moonman. This one is another animation based on Tommy Ungere's book. It is a German-French animated film. Ungere himself is actually the narrator for this animation. So the story follows the lonely Moonman who has spent ages watching Earth from the sky. He grabs onto a passing comet and travels down to Earth. Once he arrives, the self-proclaimed Präsident der Erde, the president of the Earth, who has conquered everything on the planet, declares him a dangerous intruder who must be captured, and even starts planning to conquer the moon because he has conquered all of Earth. And so with the help of a very kind and intelligent inventor of everything, the Moonman eventually escapes and returns home. Sorry, I think there's a helicopter. So stylistically, the film has a very calm and almost dreamlike pacing, and critics often pointed out that it feels a bit unusual for a children's movie. Personally, I don't think it's too unusual for a German animation, because many German children's stories have this slightly darker undertone combined with a lot of warmth and imagination, or maybe it's just the ones I'm selecting. It's also very useful for language learners because the Moonman doesn't speak any languages, and so when he arrives on Earth, he learns German, and the audience can kind of follow along with his development of speech, even though obviously his is far faster than ours. That means that some vocabulary is introduced in a way that's easier to follow, it's often repeated, and since you're discovering it together with the main character, it's easier for you to grasp. Anyway, great animation. Okay, so now on to number 4. This one is called Wickie und die starken Männer, or Wickie and the Strong Men. So before I talk about this animation specifically, I wanted to talk about this collaboration between German television and Japanese animation studios. In around the 1970s, several shows that many people in Europe grew up watching were actually produced as anime in Japan and then broadcasted to Germany. And so one of the most famous examples of this is Wickie. So it was originally produced in Japan by the studio Zuya Ezel, and it was based on a Swedish children's book series and then broadcasted in the German dub. And it was very popular in Germany, so I'm adding it here in this list of German animations. The story follows Wickie as son of a Viking chief, Halva. Unlike the other Vikings, Wickie isn't particularly strong. He is quite young after all, but he generally enjoys being part of the Vikings and often saves the crew through clever ideas and creative problem solving. Each episode follows the Vikings on an adventure where generally brute strength usually fails, and Wickie ends up finding a novel solution to help the Vikings out of a pickle. So the cultural impact of the series is surprisingly large. Those who know the group Rammstein know that there is a keyboardist who has the nickname Flake, and so he took that nickname from the Viking village in Wickie. Those who know One Piece, Oda Eiichiro, he was inspired to do a pirate-based and adventure on the sea from Wickie. So I started watching One Piece in preparation for this video, and I wanted to do a comparison of the characters, but since I have not watched all of them, if you want to know more about the comparison between these two and how similar they are, I stumbled across a YouTube video, which you can also watch, and I'll put it right here. For language learners, this animation is not particularly the easiest if you don't know that much, but it's quite visual and that's always helpful. But overall, culturally speaking, it's a very good animation. If you're more advanced in German, I would very much recommend. Okay, so now on to number 5. Die Biene Maja, or Maya the Bee, is another really famous example of this German-Japanese collaboration era. The original story is from a German children's book. It was originally published in 1912 by Waldemar Bonsels. It became an international seller and was eventually translated into more than 40 languages. This story follows Maya, an extremely curious young bee who leaves the hive shortly after being born because she wants to explore the wider world, and instead of staying safely inside of the beehive, she travels through fields and forests, meeting all kinds of insects, beetles, spiders, grasshoppers, and flies, and slowly learns about both the beauty and the dangers of nature and the world around her. So this story is written like a Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age story. So much like in Der Moonman, the character learns about life and dangers and everything in the world through experience, and it is quite philosophical, much like Der Moonman. Maya is known to question a lot of things, and questions are very useful for language learning because it's easier to keep track of the plot. More dialogue-based, and Maya is an extremely curious bee, so she asks way too many questions way too many times. Like when she was born, she starts questioning why she was given the name Maya, why she was born, things like that, but again in fairly simple terms, in fairly simple language. Again, she was just born. Another point I wanted to add is that there's a narrator, a grasshopper, that narrates the episodes, the beginning of the episodes, and this format I think is a bit easier to understand what is happening because you get very clear audio and you can hear very slowly and very thoroughly what is being said. But also the narration is slightly of a dialogue. The grasshopper is speaking to the audience, and again, this also helps with making the text a bit simpler and easier to understand. And also, I just really like this animation. Again, I feel very connected to this one because I watched it as a kid, and of course I watched it in a Russian dub. It asks interesting questions. Maybe I just really connect to Maya. Great animation. So number 6, Heidi. It's another really famous example of the Japanese-European animation era. So the story comes from a classic Swiss novel written by Johannes Spüri in the late 19th century, but the version most people know today is the 1974 anime adaptation produced in Japan and then later broadcasted in Europe, first dubbed in French and then German because it's a Swiss novel, so you gotta cover all the Swiss languages. And so the story follows Heidi, a young orphaned girl who is sent to live with her grandfather in the Swiss Alps. The old man is kind of distant and grumpy at first, but he gradually changes thanks to Heidi, who spends her days caring for the goats and exploring the mountains with her friend Peter. And what's interesting about this animation is how much care went into the production of it. Members of the animation team actually traveled to Switzerland to study the landscape so the mountains could feel authentic. Additionally, this series was also directed by Takahata Isao with contributions from Miyazaki Hayao, and both of whom later co-founded Studio Ghibli. If Miyazaki's very, very early work interests you, by all means, please watch it. I must say that it's generally intended for a young audience, but I would still recommend you watch it if you're learning German because younger children tend to use not such complex words. The pacing of it is very calm, focuses more on everyday life moments, so conversations, walks in the mountains, small friendships, which makes it easier to understand what is happening. It's slow and very approachable for language learners since many scenes revolve around simple conversations about daily life rather than action scenes. Also, it just holds a very special place in my heart because I watched it with my parents when I was a kid. I watched it in the French version because that's how I was learning French, and I now live in Switzerland and I get to see Heidi on my milk bottles, and it makes me smile. I also added it to the French collection because again they were dubbed in both languages, and if you want to watch my French collection of animation recommendations, I will also put it right there. Okay, next up for number 7 we have Meister Eder und sein Pumuckl, and it's another German classic series. It's a mixed live action and animation. It tells the story of a carpenter from Munich, Meister Eder, who accidentally sees a mischievous imp, or a small mischievous sprite, and according to this imp law, this sprite law, once a human sees the sprite has to stay with them. And from that point on, Pumuckl lives in the workshop, causing chaos, whilst Meister Eder tries to keep things under control. Most episodes revolve around small everyday situations, customers coming into the shop, neighbors visiting, or Pumuckl sneaking out into the city, which quickly spiral into trouble because of his curiosity and stubbornness. It's one of the earliest TV series to combine live action actors with hand-drawn animation, which was technically very complicated at the time, which makes it a very unique kind of animation, and so I wanted to add it to this list too. For language learners, though it is a bit difficult because of the vocabulary, at times it is quite useful because the show also includes bits of Bavarian dialect and local expressions, which gives you small glimpses into regional Germany without making the dialogue too difficult to follow. Now on to number 8, Käpt'n Blaubär. So, Käpt'n Blaubär is a German animated puppet character created by Walter Mörs, and the character is a retired sea captain who lives with his grandchildren and a slightly clueless rat, Hein Blot, and they live on a stranded fishing boat. Most episodes begin with Blaubär telling the children an absurd story from his supposed seafaring past. The structure of the show is quite distinct in that sense. The present-day scenes are filmed with puppets, whilst the captain's backstories and tales are shown in animated flashbacks full of bizarre islands, sea monsters, and ridiculous inventions. And then towards the end, the grandchildren insist that the story must be a lie. Some strange piece of evidence appears that suggests that it might actually be true, kind of resembling the adventure literature or tall tales like those of Baron Münchhausen. So this one's also quite a bit harder, maybe for intermediate learners, because the stories are more monologue based and end up using longer phrases and more elaborate vocabulary, but nonetheless it's a very good tool for language learning. So number 9, Pettersson and Findus. It's originally a Swedish children's book series by Sven Nordqvist about an eccentric old man, Pettersson, and his mischievous talking cat, Findus. And they live together on a small rural farm where They do these everyday tasks, planting vegetables, baking a cake, preparing for Christmas, and inevitably spiral into chaotic adventures. Oftentimes, Findus constantly causes trouble and Pettersson actively tries to resolve the problems. This seems to be an ongoing theme for a lot of these animations, it seems. But yeah, so there are these creatures called Pumuckl, which are quite funny, and Pettersson's bizarre homemade inventions are also entertaining to watch. But overall, it's a very cute animation. And this one was recommended by my German-speaking friend, as well as Käpt'n Blaubär, also recommended by my German-speaking friend. And so for language learners, this series has a very clear dialogue, and the stories are for the most part easy to follow even if you miss a few words. And since many episodes revolve around everyday situations, again kind of like Heidi, cooking, cleaning, and so on and so forth, you get to pick up a lot of vocabulary from around the house in a more natural way, though it's a bit hard to catch everything all of the time. Okay, so ending with a bang. Number 10, Bernd das Brot. And so Bernd das Brot is one of the strangest and most iconic characters in German children's television. The character was created for the Kika channel in the 2000s, and it's about a depressed loaf of white bread with tiny arms and feet who constantly complains about his miserable life. So this character became famous because when it was broadcasted during hours when channels normally had no programming. This is just the short sketches of Bernd played throughout the night, showing him trapped and begging viewers to let him go and turn off the TV and go to bed. And his most common reaction to all of this is to simply shout, "Mist!" like darn, which became one of the character's running jokes. And this unexpectedly dark humor gave the character a large adult fan base, and it eventually gave Bernd das Brot a Grimme Award, or a Grimme Preise. Basically, it received one of the most prestigious German television awards possible. And so for language learners, it might be a bit annoying to not understand all of the jokes, but a lot is understood just via his intonation, and it's just generally culturally very German, so I would recommend watching it regardless. And I wanted to add it to this list just as an additional. It is helpful that the dialogue is quite slow and repetitive and very clear. Then again, the humor often has wordplay and cultural references, which make it a fun way to encounter the slightly more ironic side of German animation. And so though you might not understand everything, I still would highly recommend you watch just for your own reference, watch a little bit of it too. So thank you for watching, and I hope you like these recommendations because I put so much work into gathering them. Also, if there is any video that you want me to make, anything you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments, because this idea was given to me in the comments. I'll put it somewhere right here, and a lot of the other videos I make are given by the comments, so want to be called out, or if there's anything you want me to make, please let me know. You could also check out a history of German animation video that I stumbled across when I was researching all of this. I'll pin it right here. I also have a collection of French animations that I would recommend if you're studying French or just generally because they're good animations. I also have a video talking about world building using 3 great Russian/Soviet animations as examples. And again, thank you for watching, and if you're interested in language learning, linguistics, animation type of content, please subscribe and watch a few of my other videos. Maybe it helps me a lot, and yeah, until next time, see ya!